In the previous videos of this Honda CX500 build on a budget, if you haven't seen them, we so far have cut the frame, installed a seat hoop with a custom inserted tail light. We even made a seat base out of thermal plastic and shaped that perfectly to the subframe on this bike by adding heat. We installed the seat clips, shaped up the foam, and we even made some really cool side covers, which was a bit of a challenge, but we got there in the end. And I also came up with a really cool way of making a headlight bracket for these style of bikes. And now that's all done, I want to do something with these gauges. I also want to make a rear mudguard and a tail tidy to put the number plate on. Although I could potentially buy a gauge or a set of gauges for this bike, this is a budget build for me. In other words, if I can fabricate something, if I have the materials, I'm going to give it a go and show you the process rather than purchasing something brand new. And much like anything you make from scratch, including these gauge cups that I'm making, you never really know how they're going to turn out, but more on this later because I want to move straight on to making the rear fender for this bike. So I'm going to use the original plastic guard for this bike and mount it to the new fender that I make. Starting out with a piece of mild steel cold rolled, this is 1.2 millimeters thick, getting it to the shape that I want and then moving it to the power hammer to do some shrinking. Over to the planishing hammer to flatten everything out and then roll it out on the English wheel. And now that I have it to the shape that I want, I'm going to use the bead roller and tip the edges and fold this back on itself, a bit like the original Honda fender would have been, and this adds a lot of strength into the part. I found the best way to do this was in multiple passes, changing the dies as I went, and each pass that I did I would add more pressure, and then moved over to my foot operated shrinker and just shrunk those corners where it would really need to fold back on itself. But stick around because I'm going to show you exactly how to do this with the original fender if you don't have the ability to shape one yourself from scratch. By the time I got to the second one, it was a lot faster. It was using the nylon hammer to get the shape, using the power hammer to shrink it, planishing hammer to flatten it out, English wheel to roll it out, and then on the bead roller to tip the edges and make that seam. So this was the practice run, and this is the final part. So now that I've tipped and rolled these edges of this mudguard, given it a lot more strength, I've made a couple of tabs here which I'm going to be tacking onto the frame in order to mount it. I also want to do 2 mounting points up the back here, going straight through this. And as I mentioned, shortly I'm going to show you exactly how to modify your existing rear fender so you can make that fit on your bike if you don't have the ability to make one from scratch. And these mounting points are pretty universal, so I can use them for whatever fender I decide to go with. And never underestimate the usefulness of kids plasticine. I use this for fiberglass all the time, and it's going to be perfect in this application. If I was to put 2 bolts straight through here and tighten them up, because there's a gap, it's like a wedge-shaped gap, you could potentially distort the mudguard, and I've spent a bit of time shaping it, so I want to keep it exactly as is. I could, I guess, put a plate on the bottom and then bolt this through the plate, but rather than do that, I think I'll just make a wedge. That's just a super easy way to get some measurements which are otherwise really hard to get to. As you can see, it's nice and sturdy, and having that tipped edge all the way on the outside as a seam definitely gave it the strength it needed. So using the arc droid to cut out the tail tidy or number plate bracket if you will, this also has tabs on the side that you can either cut off or you can bend at 90 degrees to mount your turn signals. I'll leave a link in the description where you can grab one of these for yourself. They're specifically made to fit an Australian number plate perfectly. I'm making an extension piece for my tail tidy so that I can use the existing bolt holes that I pre-drilled on the bike, but generally speaking, the rear fenders that come on the bikes that I'm going to show you how to modify have pre-drilled holes that you can utilize to mount these tail tidies. And getting back to those aluminium gauge cups that I was making for the Speedo and Taco, I ended up welding the disc to the tube all the way around and then put it into the lathe and started to machine it down. After spending quite a bit of time trying to get a nice curve on this particular cup, I ended up getting so close to my weld line that it separated the disc from the tube again. So after re-welding it, putting it back in the lathe and then machining it down, I ended up with this. As you can see, it's got a bit of a curve, but it's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted a bit more of a curve than that. It's wafer thin down here. I don't want to go any more. The gauge is in it, as you can see. I was even planning on doing a bezel that sits around the outside that covers all that up. So all you see is the actual dials and the numbers. But I'm thinking, rather than going ahead and making another one, I'll show it on the bike in a sec. Let me know if you like it or hate it. Should I stick with it and go and make 2 of these? Or should I just move to something like 3D printing? If I was to make another one, I'd probably curve it down around the sides for a bit more coverage, but let's get stuck into making one from the original fender and show you how to do that. It's simply a matter of just cutting it down to the size that you want. I can use the existing wedge that I've made because it fits perfectly, making a simple bracket that is actually going to be welded onto the fender itself. And if you want to use your existing plastic inner liner, you can use that by just heating it up and just manipulate it so that it fits. If you're trying to weld up any large holes, a quick tip here: if you have a chunk of copper, or in my case a copper hammer, you can use it as a backing and just weld straight on top of it, and the weld won't stick to it, but it will certainly fill up that hole nice and easy for you. And then you can just grind it all flush. For the rear turn signals, I plan on drilling holes in these tabs and then weld them straight onto the side here. But then I had a bit of a change of ideas because I've done this many times before and I thought I'd try something different. All I'm doing here is welding in a stainless steel nut flush with the outside edge so that I'll have a nice thread that I can actually screw in the turn signal. And if you want to put turn signals in a similar location on your bike and you don't have a welder or you don't know how to weld, you can simply do the same thing, but just using these things called riv nuts. They're exactly as they sound. They're just a nut that you can rivet in place once you drill the hole. And this here is a pretty standard riv nut kit. Basically, it's the rivet gun, the different mandrels to go with the different nuts that you have. This kit only goes up to M6 and you will need probably something like an M8. Just double check the turn signals that you have. But you pretty much just put those in place, rivet them in, and then you'll have a perfect thread on the inside to screw in your turn signal. And if you're drilling any holes through steel, don't forget to use rubber grommets just to protect that wire. I made a set of aluminium spacers for this just to give it a bit more of a custom look, and found that they were just probably a little bit too small for what I wanted, so I whipped out another set, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. And if you're building a motorcycle and interested in any of the products I'm using in these videos, including these really small, smart looking turn signals, don't be mistaken by how small they are. They're ridiculously bright. And the tail light, as well as the seat plastic to make your seat bases, the seat clips, the foam, it's all gonna be there. I'll leave a link in the description for you to go and check those out. So let's talk about cost for this particular build, because it's hands down the cheapest bike that I've ever built. And although I have fabricated quite a few bits and pieces for this particular bike to make it custom, you don't have to necessarily do that. I just like to share the process on things that I've made so that I can possibly help you at home build your bike and make it unique. So far, in an earlier video I mentioned it was $513, and this is in US dollars, that I've spent on this bike so far in parts. That's 820 Australian. I've added a tank sealer kit to this, and I highly recommend doing that if you've got a rusty tank. That tank sealer kit was $92. There are some things you should never skimp on when building a motorcycle, and these things are pretty obvious, like tires and brakes for obvious reasons, but also high on that list should be brake lights and turn signals. These guys here are the LSL Nova Pros. They're the ones I'm going to be running on this bike here. Absolutely love them. They're super bright. But getting back to the cost, so turn signals were 117 US dollars, and that's for a set of 2, so you need 2 sets of those. So the total cost of everything that I've spent on this bike so far, and I still want to do a paint job on a few bits and pieces, as well as a couple of $100 needs to be spent on the seat upholstery. It's so far $845 US or $1,335 Australian. That's pretty damn cool to have a bike that's custom and unique to you. I just wanted to install these on the tail tidy to show you what they look like. I'll be cutting this tab off because I don't need it, because I already made the mountings up here. I still have a little bit more to do on this CX500 project, like figuring out the gauges, also getting the seat upholstered, but if you want to keep watching videos just like this one, go and check out one of these two.
I really hope that my videos give you inspiration and some ideas on how to customize your bike to make it unique to you and so something that you can be proud of.